I'm Olivia Sanders, 28, a pediatric nurse at Children's Memorial Hospital. People say I have gentle hands with frightened children and an unwavering dedication to families in crisis, but none of that seemed to matter in this moment. The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of my parents' dining room, crystal fragments catching the chandelier light like fallen stars. My mother's face had gone white, her perfectly manicured hand still extended from where she'd thrown it. "You ungrateful little..." My father's voice cut through the stunned silence of our family dinner, but I held up my hand. The scent of my mother's expensive perfume mixed with the lingering aroma of roast beef, creating a nauseating cocktail that made my stomach churn. 23 relatives sat frozen around the mahogany table, their forks suspended halfway to their mouths, watching this moment unfold like spectators at a car crash. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. "Stop," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The words seemed to echo in the cavernous room with its oil paintings of ancestors who'd built the Sanders fortune through steel and ruthless ambition. "Just stop." My younger brother Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his medical school acceptance letter still lying beside his plate, like a trophy. The golden boy. The one who'd chosen the path they'd mapped out for him since birth. Unlike me. The weight of their disappointment had been crushing me for months, ever since I'd told them I was leaving my position at the prestigious private practice they'd secured for me. Since I'd announced I was taking a job at the Children's Hospital in the poorest part of the city. Since I'd chosen purpose over profit. "Olivia," my mother's voice was ice cold, each syllable precisely enunciated in that way that had terrified me as a child. "Sit down. We're not finished discussing your career suicide." The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, marking seconds that felt like hours. I could hear my cousin Sarah's baby crying softly in the next room, probably sensing the tension that had seeped through the walls like poison gas. "There's nothing to discuss," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I've made my decision." My father's face flushed red, the same color it turned when his blood pressure spiked during board meetings. "You've made a fool of yourself. And of this family. Do you have any idea what people are saying? What the Hendersons think? The Blackwells. I don't care what they think." The words hung in the air like a slap. My Aunt Margaret gasped audibly. In the Sanders family, reputation was everything. Image was currency. And I'd just declared myself bankrupt. "Well, we do," my mother said, rising from her chair with the fluid grace of someone who'd attended finishing school and never forgotten a single lesson. "We care very much. Which is why you're going to call Dr. Morrison tomorrow and tell him you've reconsidered." No. Such a small word. 2 letters. But it felt like I'd just detonated a bomb. My father stood slowly, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across the table. When I was little, that shadow had meant safety, protection. Now it felt like a storm cloud ready to unleash lightning. "You will do as you're told," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that had made grown men in boardrooms tremble. "Or you will face the consequences." I felt something shift inside me then, like a tectonic plate finally giving way after years of pressure. The scared little girl who'd spent her childhood trying to earn their approval was cracking apart, and something stronger was emerging from the ruins. "What consequences?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You'll cut me off financially? I'm already supporting myself. You'll disown me? You've been treating me like a stranger for months anyway." My mother's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, darling. You have no idea how much worse we can make your life." The threat hung between us like a blade. Around the table, my relatives watched with the fascination of people witnessing a public execution. Some looked horrified. Others seemed almost entertained. But it was my grandmother's face that caught my attention. 92 years old, sharp as a tack, sitting at the head of the table like a queen surveying her kingdom. She was watching me with something that might have been pride. "You know what?" my father said, his voice rising again. "We're done pretending. We're done making excuses for you. We wish." He stopped himself, but I could see the words forming on his lips. The words that would change everything between us forever. "Say it," I whispered. Richard, my mother warned, but there was something hungry in her eyes, like she wanted him to finish the sentence as much as I did. We wish you were never our child, he spat, the words exploding out of him like they'd been building pressure for years. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the baby had stopped crying. Even the grandfather clock seemed to pause mid-tick. I felt the words hit me like physical blows, each one finding its mark in the soft places I'd tried so hard to protect. But instead of crumbling, instead of breaking down and begging for forgiveness like the old Olivia would have done, I felt something else entirely. Relief. Consider that wish granted, I said, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. From today on, live as if I was never your daughter. My mother's face went slack with shock. My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around the table, 23 pairs of eyes stared at me in stunned silence. But I wasn't finished. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small velvet box I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Inside was the Sanders family ring, passed down through 5 generations of women. The ring my mother had given me on my 18th birthday with a speech about legacy and responsibility. I set it gently on the table beside my untouched plate. I won't be needing this anymore, I said. Then I turned and walked toward the door, my heels clicking against the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded like freedom. I was almost to the foyer when I heard my grandmother's voice, clear and strong despite her age. Olivia. I stopped but didn't turn around. Your great-great-grandmother would be proud, she said. She built this fortune by following her heart, not by following rules. I smiled without looking back and reached for the front door handle. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me, quick and urgent. Someone was following me out of that room, and something in the sound of those steps made my blood run cold. The footsteps belonged to Marcus. My brother caught up to me just as I reached my car in the circular driveway, his dress shoes crunching against the gravel. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the faint smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. It should have been peaceful, but the way Marcus was breathing, sharp, panicked gasps, made my skin crawl. Liv, wait, he called out, using the nickname he hadn't spoken in years. You can't just leave like this. I turned to face him, keys already in my hand. Under the amber glow of the estate's security lights, Marcus looked younger than his 25 years. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his tie askew. For a moment, he reminded me of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Watch me, I said, pressing the unlock button on my key fob. They didn't mean it. His voice cracked slightly. You know how they get when they're angry. Dad's blood pressure medication makes him say things. Stop. I held up my hand the same way I had inside. Just stop making excuses for them, Marcus. You've been doing it your whole life. The wind picked up, rustling through the oak trees that lined the driveway. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the low rumble of traffic on the highway, the real world, moving forward while the Sanders family imploded behind these iron gates. Marcus stepped closer, and I caught the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something else. Something sharp and medicinal that made my nurse instincts prick up. You don't understand, he said, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. There are things you don't know. Things about the family. About why they're so desperate to keep you in line. I paused with my hand on the car door handle. What are you talking about? He glanced back toward the house, where warm light spilled from the dining room windows. I could see silhouettes moving inside, my parents, probably trying to salvage what was left of the dinner party. Probably spinning some story about my breakdown to save face. The hospital, Marcus said. The children's hospital where you work. Do you know who's on the board of directors? A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October air. Marcus, what? Dad is. Has been for 3 years. And the Hendersons. The Blackwells. Half the people who were sitting at that table tonight. The keys slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, clattering against the gravel. I bent to pick them up, my mind racing. The children's hospital. My sanctuary. The place where I'd finally found purpose, where I'd been making a real difference in kids' lives. "You're lying," I whispered, but even as I said it, pieces were clicking into place. The way my supervisor had been so eager to hire me despite my lack of pediatric experience. The way certain families, wealthy families, always seemed to get priority treatment. The way funding for the free clinic kept getting mysteriously cut. Marcus's face was pale in the security lights. "I wish I was. Liv, they've been watching you, monitoring your work. They know about every patient you've treated, every family you've helped." The sound of the front door opening made us both turn. My father stood silhouetted in the doorway, his imposing frame backlit by the chandelier. Even from 50 yards away, I could feel the weight of his gaze. "Marcus." His voice carried across the driveway like a command. "Come inside. Now." My brother flinched, as if he'd been struck. "I have to go," he said, but he didn't move. "Tell me the rest," I demanded. "What aren't you saying?" Marcus looked between me and our father, torn. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "The medication trials. The experimental treatments for the kids with cancer. Some of them, Liv, some of them aren't what you think they are." My blood turned to ice. I thought about little Emma Rodriguez, 7 years old with leukemia, who'd been responding so well to the new treatment protocol. About Tyler Chin, whose brain tumor had been shrinking faster than anyone expected. About all the children whose families had been so grateful for the cutting-edge therapies that were supposedly saving their lives. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "Marcus." My father's voice cracked like a whip across the night air. This time, my brother started walking backward toward the house, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm sorry, Liv. I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you sooner, but they said if I kept quiet, they'd make sure you never found out. They said they'd protect you." "Protect me from what?" I called after him, but he was already jogging back toward the house, leaving me standing alone in the driveway with questions that felt like poison in my veins. I got into my car with shaking hands and started the engine. As I pulled away from the estate, I caught a glimpse of my father in the rearview mirror. He was still standing in the doorway, watching me leave. But there was something in his posture, something satisfied, almost triumphant, that made my stomach lurch. The drive back to my apartment should have taken 20 minutes. Instead, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of Children's Memorial Hospital, drawn there by a compulsion I couldn't name. The building looked different at night, darker, more imposing. The cheerful murals on the walls seemed to leer at me in the shadows. I used my keycard to enter through the staff entrance, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The night shift was minimal, just a skeleton crew of nurses and one attending physician. I could move through the building without being questioned. I made my way to the oncology ward, where most of my patients were housed. The hallway was dimly lit, filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the whispered conversations of night nurses. I passed room after room of sleeping children, their small forms dwarfed by hospital beds and surrounded by machines that kept them alive. Emma's room was at the end of the hall. Through the window, I could see her sleeping peacefully, her bald head barely visible above the blankets. Her chart hung on the door. I'd reviewed it dozens of times, celebrating each improvement in her blood work, each sign that the treatment was working. But now, looking at that chart with Marcus's words echoing in my head, I saw things I'd missed before. The medication names that didn't quite match what I'd been told. The dosages that seemed unusually high. The way certain test results had been filed separately from the main chart. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything, my hands trembling as I worked. If Marcus was right, if there was something wrong with these treatments, then I needed evidence. I needed proof. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming down the hallway toward me. I looked up to see Dr. Morrison, the same Dr. Morrison my parents had wanted me to work for, walking toward me with a security guard at his side. "Miss Sanders," he said, his voice carrying that same cold authority I'd heard in my father's voice. "I think we need to talk." The security guard's hand moved to his radio, and I realized with growing horror that this wasn't a coincidence. They'd been waiting for me. They'd known I would come here. And now I was trapped. "Dr. Morrison," I said, slipping my phone into my pocket as casually as I could manage. I was just checking on Emma. Her fever spiked earlier, and I wanted to make sure. At 11:30 at night? His smile was thin, predatory. How dedicated of you. Though I'm surprised you're still here, given what I heard about dinner at your parents' house this evening. The security guard, a man I'd never seen before, built like a linebacker with cold, calculating eyes, stepped closer. The hallway suddenly felt much smaller, the cheerful pediatric decorations on the walls now seeming to mock the darkness of the situation. News travels fast, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the fear crawling up my spine. Dr. Morrison chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. Your father called me about an hour ago. He was quite upset. Apparently, his daughter has been having some emotional difficulties. Stress-related paranoia. Delusions about her work environment. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They'd planned this. The moment I'd walked out of that dining room, they'd set this trap in motion. My own family had orchestrated my downfall. I'm not paranoid, I said. And I'm not delusional. Of course not, Dr. Morrison said soothingly, the way you'd speak to a mental patient. But perhaps we should discuss this in my office. Away from the children. We wouldn't want to disturb them with any outbursts. The security guard's hand moved to his belt, where I could see the outline of zip-tie restraints. They weren't just planning to discredit me, they were planning to have me committed. Declared mentally incompetent. It would explain away everything I might try to expose, make me look like a delusional former employee with a grudge. I think I'll head home instead, I said, taking a step backward. I'm afraid that's not an option, Dr. Morrison said. You see, we have security footage of you taking unauthorized photographs of patient files. That's a serious HIPAA violation. Criminal charges could be filed. My heart hammered against my ribs. They had cameras I hadn't noticed, or they'd been watching me remotely. Either way, I was caught. But then I heard something that changed everything, a soft whimper from Emma's room. I turned to see her sitting up in bed, her large brown eyes wide with fear. She'd been awakened by our voices, and the sight of the security guard was clearly terrifying her. Nurse Olivia, she whispered. What's happening? In that moment, looking at this brave little girl who'd been fighting for her life while trusting us to help her, something crystallized inside me. Whatever these people had done, whatever they were planning to do to me, I couldn't let them continue hurting children. It's okay, sweetheart, I said softly, moving toward her room. Everything's going to be okay. Miss Sanders, Dr. Morrison's voice sharpened. Step away from the patient. Instead, I pushed open Emma's door and went to her bedside. She reached for my hand with the instinctive trust that children have for their caregivers, and I felt the weight of that responsibility settle on my shoulders like armor. Emma, I said quietly, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do you remember the medicine you've been taking? The new one that's been making you feel better? She nodded, her small fingers gripping mine. I want you to tell your mommy and daddy that you don't want to take it anymore. Can you do that for me? But it's helping me get better, she said, confusion clouding her features. I know, baby. But sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. And I think we made a mistake with your medicine. Dr. Morrison appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with anger. That's enough. You're frightening the child. Am I? I turned to face him, still holding Emma's hand. Or am I trying to save her life? The security guard moved into the room, and Emma whimpered again. That sound, pure, innocent fear, ignited something fierce and protective in my chest. Get away from her, I said, my voice carrying authority I didn't know I possessed. Both of you. Now. Miss Sanders, you're having a breakdown, Dr. Morrison said, but there was something desperate in his voice now. You need help. Medical help. What I need, I said, pulling out my phone, is to call the FDA. And the police. And every medical journal that will listen. I started dialing, but the security guard lunged forward, grabbing for my phone. I jerked backward, and Emma screamed, a sound that pierced through the quiet hospital like a fire alarm. Suddenly, the hallway filled with people. Night nurses came running, drawn by Emma's cries. Other patients' families, staying overnight in their children's rooms, emerged to see what was happening. Within seconds, we had an audience of a dozen people, all staring at the scene unfolding in Emma's room. "What's going on here?" demanded Nurse Patricia, the night supervisor, a woman I'd worked with for months, who knew me as a dedicated, stable professional. Dr. Morrison's composure cracked slightly. "Miss Sanders is having a psychiatric emergency. She's been making wild accusations and frightening the patients." "That's not true," I said, addressing Patricia directly. "They're trying to silence me because I discovered something about the experimental treatments. Something that could hurt these children." Patricia looked between us, clearly torn. She knew me, trusted me, but Dr. Morrison was her superior. That's when Emma spoke up, her small voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The man with the scary face hurt Nurse Olivia," she said, pointing at the security guard. "He tried to take her phone away. Nurse Olivia was just trying to help me." Out of the mouths of babes. The crowd in the hallway murmured, and I saw doubt creeping into Patricia's expression. Other parents were looking at Dr. Morrison with suspicion now, protective instincts activated by the sight of a security guard in their children's ward. "I think," Patricia said carefully, "we should all take a step back and discuss this calmly, away from the patients." But Dr. Morrison was done with subtlety. "Call hospital security," he snapped at the guard. "Have Miss Sanders removed from the premises immediately. And contact Dr. Reeves in psychiatry. We need an emergency evaluation." The guard reached for his radio, but I was faster. I hit send on my phone and the call connected. "FBI tip line," a voice said on the other end. "My name is Olivia Sanders," I said loudly, making sure everyone in the hallway could hear. "I'm a nurse at Children's Memorial Hospital, and I have evidence of medical experimentation on pediatric cancer patients without proper consent or oversight." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Morrison's face went white. The security guard's hand froze on his radio. And in that moment of stunned quiet, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A slow, deliberate applause. I turned to see my father walking down the hallway, clapping his hands with mock appreciation. Behind him walked my mother, her face a mask of cold satisfaction. "Bravo, darling," she said. "Quite the performance. Though I'm afraid it's all been for nothing." My father smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on his face. "You see, Olivia," he said, "we own the FBI contact you just called. Agent Morrison, Dr. Morrison's brother, has been expecting your call. Everything you just said has been recorded as evidence of your mental breakdown." The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. "The experimental treatments you're so concerned about?" my mother continued. "They're not experiments at all. They're cures. Real cures that we've been developing for years. But they're expensive to produce, and we can only afford to save a select few children. The ones whose families can pay," my father added. "The ones who matter." I stared at them in horror, the full scope of their evil finally becoming clear. They weren't just experimenting on children, they were choosing who lived and who died based on wealth and social status. "Emma's family can't pay," I whispered. "No," my mother said. "They can't. So Emma gets the placebo. She gets to feel hope for a few more months before the inevitable happens. It's kinder than telling them there's no hope at all." Emma's small hand tightened in mine, and I realized she was listening to every word. This brave, beautiful child was learning that her life had been deemed worthless by the people she trusted to save her. "You're monsters," I breathed. "We're realists," my father corrected. "And now you're going to be a patient. Dr. Reeves is very good at his job. By tomorrow morning, you'll be heavily sedated and completely discredited. Any accusations you try to make will be dismissed as the ravings of a mentally ill woman." The security guard stepped forward again, but this time, something unexpected happened. Patricia moved to block his path. "I don't think so," she said firmly. "I've worked with Olivia for months. She's one of the most competent, caring nurses I've ever supervised. And what you people just described, choosing which children live or die based on money, that's not medicine. That's murder." Other voices joined hers. Parents in the hallway, night nurses, even a janitor who'd been quietly mopping nearby. One by one, they stepped forward, forming a protective circle around Emma's room. My father's confident smile faltered. "You can't stop this," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "We have too much power, too much influence." "Maybe," I said, picking up my phone from the floor. "But you made one mistake." I held up the device, showing the screen that was still recording. "I wasn't calling the FBI tip line," I said. "I was live streaming to my social media accounts. Everything you just said, every word about choosing which children live or die, it's all been broadcast to 10,000 followers. And they've been sharing it." My mother's face went ashen. "That's impossible. We monitored your accounts. We controlled your access." "You monitored my old accounts," I said. "The ones you knew about. But you never knew about the account I created for the nurses' advocacy group. The one with followers at every major hospital in the country. The one that's been documenting suspicious activities in pediatric wards for months." My father lunged for my phone, but Patricia and 2 other nurses blocked his path. "It's too late," I continued. "The video has already been downloaded and shared hundreds of times. By morning, every news outlet in the country will have copies." The sound of sirens in the distance made everyone freeze. Real sirens. Real police. "Nurse Patricia called them while you were talking," I said. "The real FBI. The real police. Not your bought and paid for contacts." My parents looked at each other, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. "This isn't over," my father said, backing toward the hallway. "Yes," I said, squeezing Emma's hand gently. "It is." As my parents fled down the hallway, followed by Dr. Morrison and his security guard, I turned back to Emma. She was looking up at me with those wise, too old eyes that sick children develop. "Are you really going to help me get better?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. "We're going to help all of you get better." The sirens were getting closer now, and I could hear footsteps, lots of them, coming down the hallway. Real law enforcement. Real investigators. Real hope. I thought about my grandmother's words. Your great-great-grandmother would be proud. She built this fortune by following her heart, not by following rules. Maybe it was time to build something new. Something better. Something that put children's lives before profit margins. As the first FBI agents appeared in the hallway, I smiled and prepared to tell them everything I knew. The Sanders family empire was about to crumble, but from its ashes, something beautiful was going to grow. Emma squeezed my hand and smiled back, and I knew that whatever came next, we were going to face it together. The wish my parents had made, that I was never their child, had finally come true. And I had never been more grateful for anything in my life.